Now it's better.
That is perfect, Rudy. So perfect, just on the perfect time as well. So yeah, welcome to Metaverse and welcome to Rudy. And you are calling in from Abu Dhabi, as I understood. Yes.
Yes. Hello. It is 36 degrees outside, but I'm in a very well air-conditioned clinical facility right now. So, well, maybe I can set up the screen a little bit later with some additional fire. You will see what I'm talking about.
Thank you so much for joining, Rudy. And for me personally, it's a very interesting topic that you have. So, so welcome and thank you for joining us. And then I will leave the floor to you, and I will be here taking care of you. And if any issues occur, then just don't hesitate to call me out, and I will try to fix them.
I will simply cry for help like a toddler. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rudy.
Welcome. So, good morning or good afternoon or wherever you are. I have the pleasure to talk a little bit about virtual reality for public health. And now, I would assume most of the people in the audience have an idea about virtual reality. So what is about public health? That seems to be quite easy. That is to understand what is that. That should be everything that targets or deals with the health of certain groups and not of individuals. However, when you do some literature research, you often find examples that claim to deal with public health, and then they go for the treatment or for the education of a single person. So I have tried to avoid that misunderstanding. And going back to the first initial things, bring a little bit fire to the whole thing. I start with the boring, the declaration of interest and a funding statement. In a nutshell, no one paid me to say anything that I don't want. And everything in this presentation is really completely free from commercial, whatever kind of motivation. And here we go. Start with a little bit of fire. And what do I want to tell you with this slide? If you compare virtual reality animations and virtual reality platforms that are dealing right now with clinical or health-related topics and applications, you always see some kind of funny things. But if you want to get the real deal, the real impression, the real reality of some, let's say, emergency or other use cases of emergency training, I have to say that currently even the Call of Duty is the better environment compared to the, how do I say, kindergarten animation you see in some other platforms. To give you an impression, obviously, these are online games and not virtual reality, but some of them come also as virtual reality offer and doesn't look way better. So my first hypothesis is that when it comes to the training of emergency responders, first responders, even training of ongoing shootings in hospitals, currently we lack a little bit of quality when it comes to the emotional relation in that field. I know from other industries that is a little bit way more better, but in public health and when it comes to hospital trainings, we often lack a little bit of, let's say, the graphical thing, the reality, the closeness, the action that could be improved. And it's worth to do that because if you go back and think in the last 2 decades what happened in major public health emergencies, there was way more than one pandemic. Then there is sometimes things like Ebola you want to fight in Africa. I don't want to repeat again all these COVID-19 scenarios and all these use cases in that. But it is like that. If you take a look at these major public health emergencies, then you will find out that they have some kind of connection or linkage to ego shooters. So ordinary emergencies have a difference when it compared to major public health emergencies, where several social groups are in danger, not only a focused one, and it targets the mass and the public. And some of these characteristics that these major public emergencies are characterized, you see that widespread and wide influence and strong connection with that easy threat of health and life safety. You have social panic, you have economic recession, you have an impact sometimes on the social order or even political stability. So what does that mean? For example, yeah, you have a huge number of patients that are suddenly injured and come within a short time frame. It's not only in a war, for example, Ukraine or around Israel, but also that. And right today, we have learned that somehow in Lebanon, 3,000 or thousands of messengers exploded, and suddenly you have more than 2,000 people that are injured, more or less severe, and all that kind of stuff. And if you go through a checklist of major features and major characteristics of things like that, also, let's say a train had an accident and all that kind of stuff, you always find some kind of parallels to scenarios of ego shooters. Now, if you compare the training environment that we currently see in typical platforms, well, that is not so realistic compared to ego shooters. Of course, sometimes they go a little bit beyond the limit, but sometimes the sound compromise would be, or some mixture would be, for sure, at least a very welcome improvement. And that is why I have that a little bit provoking hypothesis that in the training for public health and emergencies, we need a little bit more graphical and other experience design from ego shooters compared to what we have currently at hand. There may be some exceptions that I have not considered. Those people I ask for forgiveness. But I saw many things where I said, nah, yeah, okay, that is really, really poor graphic. So to continue a little bit with the adventure thing, I want to talk about nuclear plants. And you may remember Fukushima after that tsunami, where we had, let's say, similar disaster response issues, not only in the plant itself, but also to a widespread amount of people in the population around that thing, and not to mention the other consequences of that tsunami, but especially around Fukushima. So how to train that is of course difficult, and quite obviously virtual reality training should be the preferred choice if available. And there are some quite remarkable scientific publications analyzing the mixture or the hybrid thing of these VR trainings and serious games. What does that offer as chance? And they really tried hard to get grip on the research, and turns out the research is, when it comes to nuclear plants, moderate. So there's a lack of papers and there's a lack of research. And if you compare it on VR training in general, you find tons of papers, even also for emergency purpose. But the combination of serious games and virtual reality training so far seems to be a market niche or a blue ocean, depending on your interpretation. But especially in nuclear training, there is, when it comes to research, there is high promise. There are plenty of brilliant ideas, but it is an under-researched field. However, if you draw parallels to fields where it is a little bit more investigated, the whole problematic, then you see definitely tremendous chances to fuse serious game design, and you simply see in the end the serious games are way more effective than with that whatever kind of design you see currently in that training sessions. And of course, if we consider, let's say, the margins typically you find in the energy sector when you run a nuclear plant, that is nuts not to invest that money to get a better training. So the few papers you find, they are really, I don't want to say overwhelming, but it's really, really astonishing how much is the difference. And that brings me also a little bit back to my initial hypothesis. If we see what serious game fusion in these VR trainings really is boosting on efficacy of the training, and you go back and see what we currently see in emergency training, then of course it is quite clear that this is a market chance for whatever kind of company, whatever kind of game studio, maybe even to say, okay, let's design a little bit more this scenario and then evolve out of that. Training sessions that are more industry-like, and then of course you have to change the language and the business development approach. But in general, I would not be surprised if you could have a tremendous market success if you offer simply the better training environment. And that is, from my perspective, one of the most impressive insights reading all the few papers compared with all the other papers, that that this is somehow an opportunity that is not yet really marketed to my best knowledge. From a data scientist perspective, that I am running here some clinical facilities, running a population health research cohort in the desert, as you see in the background, and also a venture studio. I would like to add something that I have not found so far, or not in too many papers. That is the aspect of the additional data that you can create by using these really strong simulations beyond that kiddie design. As you see how people really react, and you have really high realistic features, and that gives you quite a clue. And I would assume that that the data that you can collect and run additional queries and run additional analysis, that would be something that the economic guys among you may appreciate as intangible assets. So I won't start now an economic lecture here, but if you run a company, you may find sooner or later someone is asking about intangible assets. So that is not the hardware that you have from NVIDIA bought for a fair amount of money, but the data sets. And if there is something that you could deal as so-called intangible asset, but you can activate it and have it in the books, and suddenly your balance sheet looks way more friendly. Still, you may have to deal with liquidity issues, but at least the balance sheet is good. So here in this thing, I'm sure that this aspect of virtual reality and building up data assets that can be activated, especially for public health and whatever kind of decision support of governments or other industries that are related to that threats, that might be something that is not yet considered. At least I haven't seen that in companies that I'm aware of, and I haven't seen it at all in any publication. It's simply something people never think and never talk about. So from the intangible asset of a data set, let's go back to the very tangible asset of the building that also has to do with public health. And if it is only a hospital targeting certain groups, but here I'm talking about the fire, and that is the fire safety of buildings. Remarkably, you find some interesting games and also simulations for firefighters. That is something that seems to be somehow more fascinating. I don't know. Maybe all those developers who had Fireman Sam or whatever kind in their childhood, they remember that and went to build something like this. But here it is quite interesting what science as well as real-world application has to offer. So let me give you some examples. I think it's intuitively the gut feeling tells us, yes, of course, the spatial design of a building influences the fire safety of private and public buildings, but most people have only the passive safety in mind. But what is about the behavior of the people who work there, who live there, who are guests, may it be in a hotel, or especially may it be in a big hospital. So, and there were some interesting works trying to find out how people react when there's a fire alert, it's burning, it's smoke, it's getting really hot, it's getting really realistic. And what is with the signage system? That is a pretty boring thing. Everybody knows signage systems. Everyone knows this tiny little white man running on a green background to wherever. And most of us ignore that thing, be it in the plane, be it in the building, be it wherever. So what happens when the thing is really on fire? How you want to simulate that in an ongoing business, in an ongoing hospital. Once you have it already, maybe that is too late, but maybe you want to find out where you are right now. Or before you invest millions of dollars into a new building, it might be worth to test that. So recently a case study demonstrated that size is not always important. I'm talking about the signature system thing, but it turns out those signature systems that can be even a little bit smaller. What is way more important, the space and how high they are placed. That came a little bit as a surprise, as most probably people would say, "Naya, well, okay, if the whole thing is too small, people won't see it." But people have an idea where to search that information, and typically it seems so they are really looking to the floor, to the ceiling, not to the floor, but to the ceiling. And here you can make really the difference in when you place them high at the right position. What also turned out is the number of this signature system, that is the continuity. So you need way more of those things because people simply lost the track despite they had an idea where to search. And some of them literally would have been dead if it would have been a real fire. And the surprising insights about the number and the continuity in these various experiments that were really, very early, let's say, I don't want to say mind-blowing, but impressive. And by far, we have that completely underestimated. And when you see what is currently standard all around the world in OECD countries and compare it with the insights of this thing, then of course it is quite clear, first of all, that safety is somehow a public health concern, because if that thing goes south and you have many people burning in the building, you have definitely a public health problem and a disaster response. And that could have been avoided by an improved evacuation time. And that could have been improved by a proper idea about where to put those tiny little signs and how many of them we want to put there. So there was another experiment that is about the door design. And they found out, first of all, two things. People who are familiar with the building and people who are not. And now, remarkably, what happened? People who are familiar with the building, they literally didn't take care so much for the door design. They simply did not use the fire exit and tried to escape the normal way they know, which of course can be a trap. Or there's a shortcut, you go the fire exit that immediately brings you outside the building, and you don't go inside the building the stairway down. So especially in constellations where there are two stairways, one explicitly extra for the fire exit and one in regular use. So those who were not familiar with the building, they could have been supported more by door color and type or not. Turns out door color and type did not have a significant impact on the attention and the exit choices. So it was sometimes the sign and other elements of the design of the door. But typically you see sometimes a special door color and a special type, and that simply does not respond to the attention deficit that people have in this kinds of situation and into their decision-making processes. Now, that is something, of course, it is difficult to simulate. It's difficult to explore that thing. But of course, learning from that for all kind of impacts, maybe not even burning, but also you want to evacuate a building for other reasons. That is something that is a huge impact or has a huge potential impact on that cohort of people in the building and thus for public health. And it is almost not really, there's not too much science right now, but these studies and these experiments that were done in the past came to these contra-intuitive insights. So the learning is signage placed at a higher position has a positive effect on root choice. And the door design beyond the color has way more impact than expected. And these are somehow aspects of public health combined with use cases, as I mentioned before, that are currently not so much on the radar, but I would think these are all these three use cases have also an economic aspect and could be a market chance for people who want to work on that. So that brings me to my last example, that is occupational safety. And I have to say, at first sight, occupational safety doesn't sound too sexy, but let us dive a little bit deeper into that because there are some surprising things. Like it or not, in the long run, we're all sick and most probably also dead. But what happens in between today and then? And now I'm talking about your working place, wherever you are, in a coal mine or in a developer office at Microsoft, wherever, you always have some kind of variables that may influence your long-term health. So opportunity is also occupational safety is consists of the safety aspect as well as of the health aspect. And the health aspect is sometimes a little bit difficult to measure because there are various variables. But first of all, most people simply don't take care of that as they simply don't see any risk. Now we know from 40 decades of research what kind of risk perception is needed to change people's behavior. And there is perception in long-term health risks at your working place. That is literally a blind spot in almost every employee's and many employers' perception. And that is not good. Let me explain you that with some examples. It starts, you're sitting in front of your laptop, in front of your whatever thing, and you don't move. You won't get sick from that in short notice. But you do that over 10 years, you will find out that your life expectancy may be reduced. And there is really strong evidence that if you walk 7,000 steps at least per day, you have a fair chance to gain more than a decade of lifetime just by walking this number of steps. Now, how to make that true in a knowledge society, in a knowledge company, in a knowledge organization? No one perceives that risk, but it is there, but it's simply underestimated. It is what we call a blind spot. And of course, if you see that we are in many industries, we have scarcity of experts, we might be happy if those guys continue to work after 60 or 65. By the way, in Abu Dhabi, the local citizens retire with the age of 45 because they have so much money, but that is something else. So if you are responsible for occupational health and safety that contains not only short-term, but also long-term health issues, then you really are in trouble how to demonstrate and how to educate people about that risk that is there every day, and every day it's missed. And remarkably, most virtual reality-based trainings on occupational safety focus on avoiding injuries and all that kind of stuff. But the long-term perspective in education is, let's say, simply not existent. biological outcomes, I have mentioned that it may take time to develop, and they are affected by multiple resources and variables, but nevertheless, they are there. Now, how to get that into the people's brain? You can integrate something that is called diminished quality of life with the help of virtual reality. You may add some additional features to the head mount, maybe some suits that reduce the capability to move or make it more difficult or whatever. But nevertheless, the key component is the VR component. And whatever you do in addition to give those people the experience of the reduced quality of life, that is something you can train with a virtual reality, a living lab combination. And the success of that program, the few experiments that have been done, are really amazing. So the behavioral changes of people who went through these programs are far more better, way more better than anything that we have seen so far. And that is really a low-hanging fruit. You don't have to develop a SpaceX rocket vehicle, whatever thing, to get into, let's say, that business or into that approach. It can be done mainly by existing technologies. All you have to do is to have this idea. Don't train only for safety, but try to impair those people's quality of life. Could be eyesight, but could be also other things. There are plenty of ideas how to diminish the experience of the quality of life with VR and approaches. You simply have to implement them. And after those trainings, people really improve in the identification of those hazards, and the risk perception is way better, especially also for those long-term health aspects. And I would say, in general, maybe we need to discuss the capability of virtual reality in teaching long-term perspectives overall, not only when it comes to quality of life during the aging process. That before I go to become too philosophical, I think that is an aspect that should be discussed way more in the future. So the long-term perspective, long-term educational capability of virtual reality, and that it is so far for now. If you want to get in touch with me, of course, you can do that simply via the Metaverse One system, or you go and visit my LinkedIn profile and get in touch with me. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Rudy. Very interesting. And yes, Vesku mentioned, like, quote of the day, like it or not, in the long run, we are all sick and most probably also dead. So that was great.
I have to say that part comes from a national economist, John Maynard Keynes. In the long run, we're all dead. But yes, okay, from a health insurance perspective.
So yeah, that was great, and yeah, thank you so much. And if anyone has questions, feel free to drop them in, or even unmute if that is possible. So we got some nice comments in the chat. So yeah, you should read them, and looks like everybody enjoyed your session, which is great. So thank you again, and yeah, Vesku just beat me to it to post rate the session and feedback. So that's great.
Okay, thank you very much. So if later questions should occur, yeah, people can contact me. No problem. Thank you.
And thank you. I will just then share my screen for highlighting our next session today. So thank you, Rudy, for attending and for sharing your knowledge. And yeah, and keep enjoying the warm climate where you are. Here in Norway, where I am, it's basically starting to be autumn already. So it's like 4 and 5 degrees in the morning. So it's very, very cold.
Difficult to ride your bicycle, I see.
Yeah, soon. But thank you so much for joining, and have a great day.
Likewise. Bye.
Bye-bye.